All right, welcome everybody. My name is David. I'm a ranger at Katmai National Park. If you can hear me, we're going to get started with our play-by-play in Falls and Brooks Camp. For the next hour or so, we're going to be doing a play-by-play, kind of live ranger commentary about the bear action that we're seeing here on the bear cam. First of all, I want to thank Explore.org for making this all happen. We are partnered, Katmai is partnered with Explore.org, a non-profit organization that exists to bring wild scenes like this straight to your living room. They've got webcams all over the world, from Africa to Alaska, and the bear cam is one of them. So for the next hour, I'm going to be sharing my thoughts about what we're seeing here on the bear cam, give you a little information on some of the individual bears we're seeing, some of their habits, some of the behaviors that we can observe here. I'll also be answering questions as I go. If you have any questions that come up as you're watching, head over to explore.org/bears and enter them into the chat, into the comments section below the video feed. So we've got quite a bit of bear action here for this time of year at the falls. Historically, we tend to see a lot of bear activity here in July. We'll see a scene like this is quite common in July, to have 5, 6, 7 bears hanging out at the falls fishing for salmon. That's generally when the sockeye salmon is running up through Brooks River. The salmon are temporarily halted here at the falls, and bears have a great opportunity to fish for them. Then August comes around, and historically we see a lot fewer bears, fewer salmon. Most of the salmon have passed up the falls and are spawning in small streams, and bears will follow them up there. This year, and to an extent last year, hasn't really been the case. We've seen longer salmon runs, so salmon have been hanging out in the falls area, trying to pass the falls for longer. There's also been some pretty strong silver salmon runs coming through, and that's what the bears are fishing for now. Silver salmon are another of the 5 Pacific salmon species. They're significantly larger than sockeye salmon, and they're providing a lot of great nutrition to the bears right now. We've also got a ton of subadults using the Brooks River this year. We're seeing kind of an increase in the bear population. I think we have 12 newly identified subadults from the July bear monitoring session, and so they'll be receiving numbers at the end of this season, so stay tuned for that. One of those subadults we have hanging out up here on the lip, hoping to catch a silver salmon as it jumps through the air and tries to pass the falls. We've seen this subadult hanging out here quite a bit, it seems. There's been a few that have been fishing the falls. It hasn't been just one, but this one in particular has been fishing the lip quite a bit. We don't have an identification. We don't have a number to assign it quite yet. We'll have to wait and see at the end of the year, compare our photos. So feel free to grab some screenshots as you watch now. And we can compare those to photos from the bear monitors at the end of the year with their identified photos. A question here in the chat is, there seems to be grouping of the subadults. They're playing together, they're fishing close together. Do they maintain that quote-unquote friendship until they're sexually active? They will hang out together. They're more likely to hang out together, I should say, when they're younger like this. They have a bigger advantage by doing so. Younger bears like this one, they've got a lot of threats out in the world, and the biggest threat is other larger bears. If they group up together, if they practice kind of the buddy system, so to speak, they get a little bit more protection from that, from other bears. I'd be really hesitant to call it a friendship. I think that's more of a human construct, but later on in life, when they become adults, when they become less dependent on one another for safety, they're going to be a lot more solitary. Brown bears are solitary, they're selfish creatures. They're out for their own survival, not looking out for one another. So I certainly wouldn't expect to see any of the subadults that we see grouped up this year or last year to continue that trend as they get older. And you know, speaking of big, dominant, aggressive bears that would pose a threat to those subadults, just below the falls here, zoomed in now, we have 32 chunk. One of, if not the most dominant bear that uses the river here that we know of. Uh, 32 got into a physical altercation about, let's see, it was about an hour ago now, with another bear who's still here. I believe it's 879. I'm not 100% positive. And that bear that I believe to be 879 is fishing in what we call Otis's office, waiting for a silver or even a sockeye salmon to swim up close enough that he can pounce on it, pin it to the bottom of the river. And you know, 879, he's a bear that we see generally only in the fall months, and he's generally in the lower river. It can present some difficulties in identifying bears when they change their habits. Just as much as physical characteristics, we often use behavioral characteristics to identify bears. 879 is known to be a very noisy bear. As he snorkels around in the lower river, he breathes really, really heavily. On a calm day, you can hear it very clearly, really almost from anywhere in the lower river, when you're up on platform, anywhere he is in the lower river, that is. And you know, he also eats very noisily. He's got a very blocky muzzle, almost square. He's got pretty ovalish round ears that sit fairly high on his head. Since we only really see him in the fall months, we know of him as having a darker coat. He's also got a kind of an interesting crease on the center of his forehead, and that's the main thing that is making me think that this is indeed him. But we'll keep an eye on him. I'd be interested to know what any viewers have to think as we get some better views of this bear that, again, I think is 879. So that altercation that he had with 32 did get physical. Oh, there he is. 32 has also caught a salmon as we're talking here. It looks like a silver salmon. And as he usually does, he's going over to eat it in the island with his back to the platform. The 32 has become one of the more dominant bears on the river. He was first identified as a younger subadult in 2007. So he's in his mid-teens, he's in the prime of his life. He's a very, very large, round male brown bear. Some identifying features for 32. He's got kind of pointed, light-tipped ears. That's the big giveaway for me. He's also got an interesting brow ridge. It's very it kind of sticks out. Almost Neanderthal looking. Practice your own identification skills and track some of the individual bears that we see on the river here. Check out the Bear ID book. It's a free download on Katmai's website. It's also linked on explore.org in the comments section. It's got a lot of great information about the bears that we see, the individuals, some general information about Brooks River. And it's a really great resource for not only identifying bears, but just learning about their life histories. You know, all bears have kind of their own story that we get a glimpse at through the bear cams. And the Bear ID book is a great way to keep track of those stories and learn from them. So throughout the play-by-play here, if I stop talking for any period of time, don't worry. It doesn't mean we've lost audio or anything like that. I'm just kind of enjoying the view here with you, maybe reading some of your comments. Downriver here, sleeping on the island once again, is 480 Otis, one of the older male bears that we see here on the river. He is somewhere over 20 years old. Looks like he's perking up there as he hears 32 chomping away on his fish. Really just maybe 10 yards upriver from him. 480 Otis, he's a very large bear, not the largest and also not the most dominant. He gets pushed around by other large bears like 32. He did just earlier today, as a matter of fact. He was pushed out of his preferred fishing location. .480 was the winner of the Fat Bear contest last year. We'll be doing that again this year starting in October, so I hope you're looking forward to that as much as we are. The Fat Bear contest, otherwise known as Fat Bear Week, is when we take comparative shots of the different bears throughout the season, and we kind of show you you know, how much weight they gain. It's really is amazing. You know, bears can gain up to 50% of their spring weight by the end of the fall. You know, they have to eat a year's worth of food in just 6 months in order to survive the winter ahead. So it's a great chance to see some of the growth over the course of the season that these bears go through and get a good look at their survival techniques. And, you know, it really is pretty unusual to see this many bears fishing at the falls in this particular location at this time of year. I've talked to Troy Hammond, our chief resources, about this. You know, we saw this kind of occur last year where, you know, historically this is not the case. We don't really see this many bears in September at the falls historically, but it seems that this has kind of been a trend over the last 10 or 15 years. Bears are hanging out more and more in August, and they're hanging out at the falls more and more in September. And, you know, we really don't know exactly why. It may be that the sockeye salmon run is starting to last longer throughout the month. It could be the bears are just figuring out, hey, you know, there's still food here later on in the season in those historically slow time periods. There's an interesting question here in the chat about 7 5'5", nicknamed Scaredy Bear, and 32 Chunk. You know, they've been seen really tolerant of each other. They've even been seen playing with one another. And you know, why would that be? Why would such a dominant bear seemingly choose one other very large bear and tolerate his presence, go as far as to play with him kind of on a regular basis? You know, we can only guess as to why that would be. But you know, from my view, you know, 32, in some way or another, it's likely that he's determined that, you know, 755 just isn't a threat. He has his one area that he likes to fish, and that's not really an area I like to fish. 755 tends to hang out up against the wall, where 879, as I look at 879 more and more, I think I'm more sure that this is him. Likes to fish really right in just that one location, whereas 32, you know, if he wants to fish there, I don't think he has a problem pushing 755 out, but typically in the jacuzzi as he is now. But yeah, it's interesting. We really don't have a great answer for that question. It's something that we'll just have to continue to watch and observe. It's one of the really special things about the bear cam is we get such long FaceTime here with the bears. Again, you know, it is just kind of a window into their lives. There's a lot that goes on off camera, but it is a very intimate window. And there's not very many places in the world where you can come and predictably see the same bears over and over again and see their behaviors develop and change. So, you know, as you continue to watch things like that, like the interactions between 32 and 755, you know, I'd encourage you to take notes on it and, you know, just to think about it. And, you know, there's a lot we have to learn about brown bears, a lot to learn about these brown bears. Another question here, are the bears in hyperphagia? They are. Hyperphagia is defined as an abnormally increased appetite for food, frequently associated with injury to the hypothalamus. You know, that's not, you know, the bears aren't injured in any way. It's something that happens every year for them. Around September, October, something clicks in their brain where, you know, they go into almost hyperdrive, where they're just eating anything in sight. You know, they eat a whole lot in July as well, but come September, October, these are their last opportunities to pack on some pounds for the winter. So bears will, you know, they'll eat more. They'll often be also a little bit more aggressive. So just another rundown on the bears we're seeing here. Starting closest to us, 32 chunk, up on the lip, an unknown subadult. Going clockwise, 151 walker. I'll zoom in on him. Again, one of the younger adult bears. .879, a bear that we typically only see in the fall, as far as we know. You know, we're not sure where he goes in the summertime. We're not sure where he frequents, but certainly somewhere where he's able to be successful, because he's a very large bear. And moving down, another subadult, again, that I'm not sure is the identity to. We have about 12 or 15 subadults that are using the river this year, that were emancipated this year or last year. And it's going to be pretty tough to keep track of them. I think as we go through more seasons watching them, they'll, you know, develop some individual physical characteristics, some individual kind of quote-unquote personalities, and they'll just become more easily identifiable. And of course, some might move away from the river. Some might find other areas to eat. There's salmon in a lot of different rivers and bodies of water all over the park, as well as just outside the park, that they might find more suitable. Whether that's because it's easier to fish there, or there's fewer bears to compete with. And 480 still sleeping on the island. A lot of the bear cam viewers here know some of these subadults a lot better than I do. You know, a lot more time to view the bears than I have. So if there's consensus that that's 503, I'll go with it. Well, 503 is a very, very large bear for his age. He is still considered a subadult. He's got a very interesting life history. One of the very few bears that we know of for sure that was adopted by another bear. He was abandoned by his mother, 402, and adopted by 435, who recently returned to Brooks River just yesterday. So 503 is 4.5 years old, but he's about the size of a young adult bear, maybe a 9 or 10-year-old bear. Just a huge subadult. I'm kind of waiting, hoping to see that this is him, gets out of the water, so I can see a better look at him. If this is him, it's the first time I've seen him since July. In person, anyways. Some questions about other bears that I may or may not have seen. Have I seen 89, 634, 856? No, no, and no. I haven't seen any of those bears recently. Certainly doesn't mean they're not around. You know, the river here is a mile and a half long, and I definitely don't walk all of it very often. I think most of the time when a bear shows up, it's cam viewers that sees them first, or other rangers that are more regularly stationed along the lower river. Seen a lot of questions in the chat here about 480 Otis, if he's vulnerable sleeping on the island there. Yes, you're good. You know, he is a pretty large bear, so he doesn't have quite as many threats as some of these younger subadults. I'd be pretty surprised to see a subadult sleeping there. You know, although 480 is not the most dominant bear, he can still use his size to his advantage. He's definitely conserving his energy by not moving too far. He's basically just like sleeping at the dinner table, so to speak. You know, there are a few bears that'll push him around, but you know, unless another bear wants to sleep right there, there's not a whole lot of danger of him you know, being threatened by sleeping in that location. If anything, it's just really a pretty smart move on his part. He doesn't have to climb up that steep cut bank. He doesn't have to hike a long ways through brushy terrain to find a good bed. He's got one just feet away from his dinner table. Earlier this year, he was observed sleeping for 13 or 14 hours. And probably sleeping off a huge feast of salmon. You know, last year we watched him eat, I think it was, final count was 44 salmon in an 8-hour period. Now, I'd probably want a good nap after that as well. Now zooming back on, yeah, 503 here. It looks like there's, I got to see him get up out of the water. He definitely looks to be right, you know, the right size. This is definitely consensus on the chat here that it is 503, so I'm pretty confident as well. Yeah, first time I've seen him in month and a half now, so it's cool to see him again. You know, I know folks on the cans have been watching him change throughout the season. Bears change so much between July and September. You know, they get their new coat, their scars are covered up, they grow significantly. Even their faces seem to kind of change with their new coat and all the new fat layered around their body. A question here, why do we use numbers instead of their names? That's a great question. You know, the Bear Monitoring Project, you know, it is a scientific study. It's not done for the express benefit of cam viewers. It's not done for the benefit of visitors coming here. It's done to monitor the effect that humans have on bears, whether it's float plane traffic or hiking traffic or people viewing from the platforms. We want to gauge what our impact is on the bears so that we can adequately address those impacts in our management of the park. And so numbers are used so that we can track, you know, individual bears' use of the river and see how that changes over time in relation to people and float planes, the things I just talked about. We use numbers as opposed to names because, you know, this is a scientific study. We're not, we don't want to humanize the bears. We don't want to attribute human characteristics to them, to remain kind of unbiased and to continue to view them as the wild animals that they are. Now 151 seems to be fairly still right now for his usual self. Earlier in the broadcast, he was splashing around quite a bit more. We'll zoom in on him for a bit, get some good close-ups. 151 has some kind of interesting fishing techniques. He's very adaptable. He can fish almost anywhere, it seems. Right now he's practicing the sit and wait technique, waiting for a fish to swim by, not expending any unneeded energy, running around in the water, as he often does. Could also be that he's not so comfortable moving around quickly with another less familiar large male bear near him in 879 here. .879 is in 480 Otis's favorite spot, or at least the spot that we see 480 Otis in most. Might make 151 a little bit less confident. Maybe he's not used to seeing 879 at the falls. You know, I'm certainly not used to seeing him at the falls super often. I think I've seen him there once or twice before. Another question about the numbers, how are they assigned? They are assigned by the Bear Monitor. Each year, the bear IDs will all start with a certain number. So all the bears that we see for the first time this year will begin with. We just saw 151 try to move around a little bit and got kind of bluff charged by 879. So all the numbers in a certain year will start with the same with a certain number. So last year I believe was 700. So all the new numbers assigned to bears, all the subadults that we saw for the first time, any adult bears that came in for the first time, all their ID numbers started with 7. This year all the numbers will start with 8, so we'll have a lot of 800 numbered subadults. The numbers following the 8 are assigned randomly.
Catch and release. Catch and release. Can I ask you something?
With these 3 bears that we have on camera now, 32 in the jacuzzi, 503 in the middle, and 151 up above. I guess 879 is visible there on the top too, but those 3 bears closest to us, they've kind of become the stalwart bears. They're always around, it seems, in August and September, and it seems that they've learned to capitalize on the salmon, the sockeye salmon that are still swimming up the river or spawning in the river during August, and then also to capitalize on the silver salmon that are running as well. Now, like I said before, bears are really, really smart, and if they find something to exploit, if they find out that, hey, I can get food right here all year, I don't need to leave, that's just what they'll do. They'll adapt their behavior to maximize their calories and minimize their energy output. We've got another subadult on the scene now. I'd like to check him out, see if maybe we can identify him. Unless, of course, he just goes away. And to me, this looks a lot like 602, a subadult from 2015, first identified in 2015. Maybe he'll return for another salmon meal and we can get a better look. From the comments here, it sounds like I've missed a lot of great viewing of 503 in the last month. Reports of him hanging out with 719 a whole lot of interesting interactions there. Possibly sharing fish, protecting her. It sounds like there's a cool video of 503 going after 128. We do have to be careful about the human emotions and human characteristics that we attach to bears. Of course, I wasn't watching, didn't see any of this happen. There's some benefit to protecting another subadult. That certainly could happen. I've seen subadults team up on other bears, use one another to intimidate another third bear. But nonetheless, 503 has certainly been one of the more interesting bears to watch. One of the more interesting stories to see unfold. He's just such a unique bear, and the bears are all unique. They've all got their own stories to tell. 503 has been extremely successful as a cub, as a subadult. I think there's a lot there to be inspired by, a lot to learn from. He's looking over now at a 480 Otis who's awoken from his nap. And before he's taking a drink of water, something that we don't see super often. I've had a lot of people ask, how come we never see the bears drinking water? And they do from time to time. There's also a lot of water in the salmon that they're eating, so that could contribute to us seeing them actually drink less frequently. Also, when they're fishing at the falls, might be not quite as good of a time to take a drink of water. .32 is now approaching with the salmon. It'll be interesting to see the interaction here. I would expect 480 to move away and to avoid the more dominant bear, 32. Doesn't look like the same one that was here just a moment ago, that I believe might be 602. This bear's got a much more grizzled coat, but a very similar body shape. That bank that this subadult's climbing up is extremely steep and slippery. It's pretty impressive that they're able to climb up so easily. The brown bears aren't really known for being excellent climbers. Black bears are certainly better climbers than brown bears, but a brown bear is no slouch in the climbing department. The behavior of this subadult up on the cut bank here is really pretty typical of subadults. You know, when there's a lot of larger bears around, you know, you can expect to see a subadult come in and check out the area. And, you know, he might come down and decide to fish. He might decide it's worth the risk, that it's safe enough. But it's typical to see them be cautious like this. We might be getting used to some pretty bold subadults moving around the river. 503 is one of them, although he is pretty large for a subadult, so he can throw his weight around a little bit more than some of the other younger bears. But it'll be fascinating to watch that kind of dynamic relationship between younger, smaller bears and the more regular bears, the older adult bears that use the falls area, and see how that changes as these younger bears become more confident, as they become bigger, as they figure out that, hey, if I team up with this other young subadult bear, I'm a little bit safer to fish here at the falls at this prime fishing location. And to watch that continue to unfold is some of that real unique, sometimes unseen before in the wild behavior that we get to watch on the bear cams here. You know, I was mentioning about how black bears are certainly better climbers than brown bears. There's a question that came up, you know, why are black bears better? That comes down to where black bears evolved from. Black bears occupy forested areas much more so than brown bears do. There's certainly some overlap there, but generally speaking, black bears have evolved around trees, whereas brown bears have evolved in open tundra areas. So as a defense mechanism, black bears have, over time been selected to be better climbers. They can escape a threat more easily by climbing a tree, whereas the brown bears or grizzly bears selectively have become more defensive. As they don't have a nearby tree to climb, they're more likely to defend themselves or their cubs by charging a threat or attacking a threat, rather than running away and climbing a tree. And that subadult that he's now gone, but he came down from the bank there and hung around. I at first thought he was a different subadult than before, but the more I looked at him, the more I thought it looked like the same bear, and the more it looked like 602. I brought up the Bear ID book real quick and did a little reference. Yeah, he's a bear that I've seen quite a bit of, both at the falls and on the lower river. I've probably seen him more than any other subadult this year. Maybe that's just because I can identify him and I've seen him for more than half a season. So I am coming up on the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to wrap up the chat here. I just want to thank everybody again for hanging out and watching the bears with me here. These are always a lot of fun for me. I hope they're as much fun for me as they are for you. I always get great questions. I hope I was able to answer enough of them. We will be back again tomorrow for another play-by-play. If you are interested in checking some more out, we've got the schedule on the featured comment in the chat section below the video feed. Schedule for the rest of the week. We'll be doing a play-by-play every day. And thank you also to Explore.org for making this all happen. It really is amazing that we have an organization like Explore that founded by Charlie Annenberg, out of the goodness of his heart. He, wants to share the experience of seeing wild animals like Katmai's brown bears with the rest of the world. And it's so special that we're able to all see this together and all learn and be inspired by these animals together and learn together and kind of be a real community together. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you guys all again tomorrow. Have a good night.